All right. Well, welcome everybody for joining us today for today's webinar. Super excited for this panel and the topic specifically around how we can drive happy reps, ultimately happy prospects, successfully managing your sales team through these troubling times. I'm your host, Devin Liu, Head of Commercial Sales here at Walnut, and a little bit of intro about what we're going to be learning about and discussing today. So it was implied in the title here, but ultimately times are tough. And I think sales teams and sales leaders like us are feeling the heat. The recession really hit us, I think, a lot harder than people initially thought. And there's little reassurance that the end is near. Not only are we seeing constant layoffs on our LinkedIn newsfeed, but now we just witnessed the largest holder of tech money, a tech icon in Silicon Valley Bank, go under in just less than 48 hours last week. And for us that are still lucky to have a job, the pressure is even higher now. So we're asked to do more with less. And as a sales leader, how can you help your team accomplish these harder than ever goals? How can you help them keep them motivated despite all the tech layoffs being at an all-time high? And then ultimately, how do we do this while improving the buying experience for your prospects? So join us for our roundtable here today to hear a few of the biggest sales geniuses in the business as we discuss how to manage, coach, and inspire your team to achieve more than they ever thought they could. So specifically, the takeaways you'll learn during this webinar and some of the topics that we'll be covering is the best ways to incentivize your team, other from money and spiffs. Secondly, we'll also talk about how to keep a strong culture despite all the layoffs and lower quota attainments across the board. And then tactical advice to hear useful ways to coach your team for success. So today we have an amazing panel of sales leaders who are going to provide their perspective as we try to learn from our peers in this space. So I'll open it up. I'll start with Sam McKenna here.
Hi, you guys. The geniuses are definitely Anna and Debra, but thrilled to join you as well. Thank you so much for having me. I am the CEO of #SamSales, founder of Show Me You Know Me, if you have heard that around on LinkedIn. I've been an individual contributor for about 7 years, an executive leader for another 7 years in corporate America, and then CEO of #SamSales for 3.5 years. So thanks for having me here today.
Amazing, Sam. Really appreciate you joining. Anna?
Well, thank you. And I've been called many things. I don't know if sales genius is one of them. So thank you. I don't know about that, but I'm excited to be here. I'm the CEO of Corporate Finance Institute, an online training and certification platform and software for finance professionals. And I'm also a partner at Arthur Ventures. We invest in early growth stage companies outside of Silicon Valley. And so I've got two hats on for sure, but always came up through sales. My step into sales was as an accidental salesperson because I was working for an entrepreneur and nobody was selling. And I said, well, somebody's got to. And, from there, accidental sales leader, now to, go-to-market advisor. And certainly at the CFI, we've got a really strong team, but go-to-market is my biggest focus. So really excited to be here with Debra and Sam. Thanks.
Amazing. Accidental sales professional. I think that's maybe not the first time we heard that one. Debra?
Hi, I'm Debra Senra, and I will take the sales genius title. No, just kidding. My motto is actually hard work beats lazy genius any day. And so I'll reflect the hard work portion. I am the VP of Sales and Client Experience at a company called ThreeFlow. We are an insurtech company, fully remote in the United States, servicing brokers and insurance carriers in the employee benefits space. So excited to be here.
Amazing. So as we get this webinar started, a question we just launched our We Are Prospects movement to talk about the buying experience ultimately on the buyer side. But when we really think about it, this really boils down to the seller and what we're doing as sales leaders and the experience that we're giving our customers. And so given the bigger need for sales reps to hit quota, I guess there's this maybe even desperation during this time. I think Sales Insights Lab actually did a study in 2021, and only 24.3% of reps exceeded their quota that year. we can just imagine last year was even rougher. And so, first of all, going around the room here, maybe we'll start with Sam. Why do you think the SaaS sales process got so complex for buyers, and what do you recommend for sellers and their leaders to start doing about it?
I think maybe even complexity isn't a thing. I think the tactics that we preach and teach all day, I think can use some improvement, some refinement, and some modernization as well. I think it's really interesting too. Sometimes when I'll post things on LinkedIn, about tactics and things that have worked for me for the long haul, get a lot of objections to it, and those objections come from old school sellers or from sellers who are not really thinking about what the buying experience, what the buyers really want, right? So if we talk about cold calls, how 85% of people block cold call numbers. Then reps will say, no, I still want a cold call. And we're like, cool, your buyers are telling you they want to communicate in a different way. So I think one of the things is just really thinking about what our buyers want from us. I think the other thing to think about is just getting to be human again, right? Tossing spray and pray out the window, tossing these massive emails that we send, tossing the pitch slap that we do on LinkedIn, the connect and then auto pitch. I've gotten, 6 of them today. I'm sure you guys have as well. Just think about our buyers genuinely showing up to the table to solve their challenges, thinking about what they need. And even if we can't solve them, figuring out how we can introduce them to somebody who can help them. What an incredible way to be a resource to our buyers and to set ourselves up for the long term.
Sales has definitely changed, and I think it constantly does, especially we think about like decades and different generations, but I mean, look at the last few years and how that forced buyers to be in a completely different situation. And so, Sam, I'm actually a big fan of yours, that I follow you on LinkedIn. And so can you think about maybe one topic that stirred some controversy, but has been successful for your clients that you've been working with?
I think we'll go in the cold calls. It's just probably going to make everybody cringe, and that's okay. I'll die on this hill. I've talked about how I've broken a ton of records in my career, 13 in fact, and have never made a cold call in my life. And when we talk to clients about that, they're like, I know, exactly. They're like, that's bananas. And we're like, well, I think there are just smarter ways for us to reach out and to be more human. And it might be a manners thing. I'm originally from Switzerland. I learned manners the minute I came out of I showed up on the planet. But I think for me, it's calling somebody, right? If I called Anna in the middle of her day, she's probably back to back to back to back all day. And then if I called Debra in the middle of her day, it's like 11:59. I'm like, hi, it's Sam McKenna. Do you want to chat? She's going to be like, no, get out of here. And she's going to hang up on me. Maybe a little bit nicer. But I think for us, think about how we can do our research. We can stand out from the masses and the emails that we send. We can talk about something about the human, the company, the space that we know about them. We can meet our buyers where they are and on their own schedules, right? And even if we send out, let's say, a really thoughtful email or a really thoughtful connection message on LinkedIn, and we don't get the meeting that we're looking for, we're slowly, systematically building a brand through really smart, intelligent sequences to let that buyer educate themselves and then become an inbound lead. It's so much smarter and so much more efficient. And I don't know, it just fits my way of selling, although I know it's not for everybody.
Yeah, no, totally. And just love seeing your approach, and I think personalization, especially at this time where there's so many sellers trying to generate new business. You have to stand out of the crowd. So I appreciate your perspective on that. What about you, Anna? What have you seen as maybe a shift for the buyers recently, and then ultimately your advice for sellers out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to the original question, I think what's happened over the last 20 years is there was this sort of SaaS tech playbook that everybody was running, and it was really segmented, right? Like we had certain people on outbound and certain people on inbound, and then we would do this qualification and hand it off to a rep where the buyer's essentially starting all over again. The best, handoff, it's still starting over. And then they close, and now they're going to be dealing with an account manager and a support rep and a customer success manager. And we a lot of scale and rapid scale has been driven by, let's make this highly repeatable, segmented sales experience. And what we lost is the empathy with the buyer and the thought that we're selling to a human, to what, Sam said. So I think that, the biggest reason that sellers I know that are most successful is they're coming from empathy. They're never forgetting that there's a human as part of this. And I think the best companies I know that are performing are not creating these kind of factory-like sales experiences. They're letting the buyer lead, they're meeting the buyer where they're at, and they're making sure it's a great buying experience and not just kind of taking a playbook that worked 25 years ago for one company, who shall remain nameless. And then, we've been trying to repeat it ever since. And so I think that's really what's happened. And when I look at, the companies that don't do that, those are the companies that have the most success.
Yeah, that's definitely something we've seen significantly on our end. When you think about buyers, when we're actually willing to get on a call with the sales rep, first off, it takes a really long time to get to that point where I'm like, all right, I'm ready to actually take a call with a rep. And when I do, I think my biggest takeaway as a buyer is I want to understand if this is a fit and should I actually take the customer journey with them. But that classical factory sale, like you mentioned, running a pure discovery call where you still have no idea what the company does or how they can help you. And we still expect buyers to like fit in this mode. And so knowing that you've seen that trend, like what are you recommending your clients or the people that you work with to be able to shift to this new norm?
So, I think sometimes in the LinkedIn echo chamber, you'll see this where a buyer will kind of post, this is crazy. I asked for a demo and, it's 7 days later and I've just had the SDR meeting because we just got that booked. And now I have to talk to an AE. And I think that what I'm recommending to people is like, let's stop that. I know why we started sending inbound hot leads to SDRs. It's because we don't want to waste our AE time on unqualified inbound leads. But I don't care if account executives have to kiss some frogs along the way. I say get a lead into an AE's hands immediately and hold the reps accountable to be calling and engaging back with those inbound leads right away. And so that's number one, is I just think we've got to just reconfigure that whole inbound process and teach the reps to meet the buyers where they are. But it's about speed and not making our buyers like jump through our hoops to be qualified enough to talk to us. I think that's the big one. And then just teaching reps that, to meet and be curious and like not just look at a lead and kind of disregard it and go like, this doesn't look like it's going to be great. I just think that's just not how we win, is by like kind of parsing through and finding that one perfect lead that we're willing to spend our time with. So I'd say that's a big one.
Amazing. I really appreciate your perspective there. And what about you, Debra? What have you seen?
Well, plus one to a lot of what Sam and Anna said. There's kind of two additional thoughts running through my head. The first is, in addition to kind of middle of the road SaaS purchasing, you have these two extremes that are happening in the SaaS world. The first is selling a new category entirely. And when you're selling a new category, no matter how simple your technology, it is overwhelming for the buyer because it's something that they've never seen before. And so just by the nature of it being a new category, it's going to feel complicated to the buyer. And our job is to simplify the selling experience, to try to support them through what will be overwhelming because it's net new for them. And then on the other end of the extreme, you have highly concentrated spaces where there are a lot of people playing at the same value proposition. And there, what makes it overwhelming for your buyer is choice. As a buyer, you are evaluated on the success of how you invest money. And so if I have 15 choices, all doing the exact same thing, the thing that's running through my mind is, am I making the right selection? Am I investing my money in the right place? I think a lot of our sales process tries to stop our buyers from doing that evaluation. And I think we should really be leaning into it, because if we're doing right by our customers, which is helping is what sales is. If you really want to help your buyer, it's not just getting them to agree to purchase your product, but making sure there's a fit for what they need. And they're going to feel good about that purchase a month from now and a year from now. And then plus one to what Sam and Anna said.
Amazing. I mean, that's two complete different perspectives. One on a category creating software where this is a new way to impact an existing challenge. And so while it's exciting probably for the sellers that work at that business, for buyers, it's, I've never seen it solved this way. So I may not necessarily have that trust. On the other spectrum, very crowded spaces. And like you said, I think one word that really stood out to me, simplifying the process. Extremely hard for a seller to do. I think simplifying is one of the hardest things for anybody to do. Sam, do you have a perspective on this?
I was going to say just huge plus one to Anna about that process, right? And I think not every buyer is qualified, not every buyer is going to go through BANT perfectly right now, right? But I think the AEs, those kind of senior sellers, those are the ones that can have great conversations, that can help educate, then can maybe find, a need and budget in a way that an SDR couldn't. So remember that too, that it's not just that kind of linear process. And especially if you still need to have that, let's say you have a ton of inbound leads, make sure that there's great communication and handoff, because to Anna's point, getting to speak to one person and then a week later to another that says, so what brought you here today, is about the most annoying thing on the planet, right? Make sure there's that communication. I was going to say to Deborah's points too, we're in that same bucket, in terms of selling a new category. Some of the things that we do, like building executives brands on LinkedIn and creating their content, is brand new to people. They don't know how to buy it. They don't know what kind of money to spend on it. They don't know what the process should look like. And I would say that transparency, I'm stealing a word from Todd Capone there, that transparency is key. Talk about that, right? Say that this is new. This is, you probably don't know how to spend money on this. This is kind of why this is structured this way. This is what you can expect to get out of it and to go through, right, in this process. And I think similarly to Deborah's point about 15 choices, you think about how little time we as sellers now get with buyers, right? It's little, it's a fraction of the time. They say it's 17 to 18% of the buying time that a buyer is spending is with the seller. Holy cannoli, right? So how do we get more of that time? If we're one of 15, if we're one of 3, one of the most important things that we do as sellers is nurture our buyer, continue to educate them, continue to add value, give them perspective, even talk about things, right? We're really transparent on our side to say, Deborah, if you don't purchase us and you end up going with somebody else, totally fine. If you want to pick our brains and say, we really loved you, we're going to go in one of 2 different directions, could we get your advice? We'll be happy to help you. What an awesome way to be a partner, even if you aren't getting the revenue in the end.
That's a really interesting perspective. Shout out to Todd Capone, former CRO at Power Reviews and leadership at Salesforce. Big fan of transparency sale myself. And so as we talk about transparency, I think one of the big, I think one of the big things that we talk about is culture and transparency for a seller being in this environment or at a company that may not necessarily hit their goal this year. And so we constantly see layoffs. And I think, looking around in the industry, people are genuinely nervous about their jobs or just nervous about the outcome for this year. So as we think about creating a strong culture on our flip side, avoiding a really toxic culture, maybe we'll start with Anna here. What are the best work environments that you've worked in? And what do you think has made them unique?
Yeah, so I'll say, probably I'll talk about 2 things. I mean, one is the best sales environments I've been in are those that are really collaborative and competitive, meaning they're there to support each other and learn from each other and grow, but they're just so happy also when they're at the top of the board, right? And they're always like trying to be at the top. So I think that fun competition with each other, where we're still being super collaborative and cooperative with each other, those are the healthiest, happiest, most fun cultures to be around as a seller, I think. And then I think, you mentioned just like the times that we're living in right now. Having led sales teams through, I guess this is probably my 3rd downturn right now. I'm aging myself. I kind of take a contrarian view, which is that we need to keep the sellers and really the whole company in a bubble, right? Like, because there's so many things outside of our control. So what can we control? And let's not get up every day and talk about how bad it is out there. Let's not talk about the obstacles. Like, let's just celebrate the wins and amplify those and find more of those. Because I think what you focus on grows. And it's not to say there's not empathy and worry about what's going on, but if we can just try and minimize some of that noise and stay focused on what we can control, and which is a lot of times, our attitude, the engagement that we're having with our buyers, the seeds that we're planting all over the globe with every conversation we have, or every email we send. I think just like staying focused on those things leads to better outcomes, right? Versus getting up every day and just letting that worry overcome you, and that's all you kind of focus on and talk about, and then the day is gone and we didn't do anything positive to build pipeline or move pipeline forward, the pipeline that we do have. So those are the 2 things I would say.
Love it. Love it. I think when you talk about better outcomes, I think more so you can feel sometimes when a rep has like that pressure that is added to them. And sometimes it's unfortunately exuded on the calls. And I think even the desperation they need for the deal. And so, Deborah, as you think about the teams that you've built in the past and the team that you're building right now, what are some things that you're doing to, improve the culture despite all of the noise around us?
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer that no one does their best work when they're operating from a place of fear. And given everything that's happening in the market right now, it's hard to completely eliminate fear from your employees' minds. I think there's a reality of the world, and candidly, it has been this way for quite some time. Maybe the fears are different, but uh, personally, what I've seen over the past 5 to 10 years is an encouragement that people show up to work as their authentic selves. And with that comes their fears and their concerns and their anxieties. And you have to create a space where people can feel heard and there can be a safe place to talk about those concerns, and maybe have days where they're not coming as their best self, and that's okay. So that over a longer time period, they can at least feel safe as a human coming to work every day. I think that's one of the first things you can do. The second, I do agree that it is our job to help people see the opportunity in tough times. Another way to say that is remain positive, but I think very quickly it can go to a fake Susie Sunshine type place. That's not what I'm talking about. As a leader, we have to figure out where the opportunities are and what is the environment within which success is possible, and really believe that environment, and then over communicate that to our teams. It's not pretending that what's hard isn't out there. It's doing the work to figure out how do we succeed despite everything that's going on here. If you don't have an answer for that, that's probably where you need to start as a leader. So creating that and reiterating that with the team. And then it might sound counterintuitive, but the last thing I'll say is just being as transparent as possible. There's a lot of uncertainty in the market. I don't know what 6 months from now is going to look like. And anybody who says they do, they're lying through their teeth. But being transparent about what we know, what we don't know, what we're tracking, what we're looking for, what are the indicators that help us make decisions, being really open about that. So at a minimum, people can feel like they understand the framework that you're using to make tough decisions, which could be changing targets or asking them to enter a new environment where success is possible. If they feel like they have a shared vocabulary with you to describe what's happening in the world, I think that also creates, if not a total sense of safety, at least some comfort that we're all in this together.
Yeah. Authenticity, transparency. I'm starting here a theme here, whether that's internal or external, it all bleeds in with one another. And so that leads to another point here. As we talk about authenticity and transparency, obviously there are a lot of struggling reps this year, and no fault of their own. I mean, we were put in a very hard selling environment. Actually, one of the things I shared with my team at our recent revenue kickoff, we were transparent that like this year is going to be really hard. But the fact that this is an opportunity for us to come out of this as not just very successful sellers, but the skills that we're going to gain out of this are going to carry us for the rest of our selling career. And so, us trying, in that scenario, I was trying to be as transparent as possible, setting the expectations. But like I mentioned earlier, 24.3% of reps hit quota or exceeded quota in 2021. And I'm sure those statistics hold true or very similar in 2022 as we just wrap that up. And so, Sam, if you had a rep that was struggling on your team, whether that was during your time on 24 or during your time at LinkedIn or, anybody that you work with or mentor now, what would you do? How would you coach them to succeed in this hard time right now?
I think one of the things I always think about is focusing on silver linings, right? No matter what environment we're in, we can't change that environment. We're not going to be able to have an impact on the financial system or what's happening with COVID or whatever. So we have to accept what's happening and figure out how we build a process to move forward. I do think one of the most important things that a lot of leaders miss is the relationship that they first personally build with the person that's reporting to them. So showing that you care about them inside and outside of the office. What are their goals? What are they motivated by? Why are they here? What are they trying to achieve? What do they want to build on in their own skill set? Asking those questions is really important. And I think sometimes we try to take shortcuts to business results instead of focusing on the relationships. I think that's important for any new leader, whether you're just getting promoted to frontline or whether you're new to an organization. Build your relationships first. The business results will come second. You just need to do that as a starting point. And I think in terms of how to stay motivated, right? Again, sales, especially for us in sales, it is such a roller coaster, right? Highs, lowest lows every single day. It feels like, so I think one of the most important things, right, is developing a process that we can stick to. What 1, 2, 3 things can we control every single day that we know will make impact? What can we also do to celebrate the little wins? We have a Slack channel here at Sam Sales all about that. And it's sometimes it is really, really little wins. Sometimes it's personal wins. Sometimes it's, oh my God, I've been emailing Anna for 6 months and she finally responded, whatever it is. It's fictional, by the way. But, those little wins really matter, right? They're inspiring, they're encouraging to others. And I think that that's one of the things that I would suggest for all of our reps, right? Share those little wins, like those little milestones, right? Trust the process to do that. I think the other thing is to focus, if we know we're going to have a crappy year this year, if we know that, let's say our quotas maybe even are being reduced or leaders say we're sticking to the same quota, but we know it's going to be a tough year. This is really our year to focus on building relationships, to get out there in terms of prospecting, to doing all that foundational work that was actually supporting our existing clients and potentially new clients. So get content out there, make sure that you're asking people how you can help, reach out to clients, maybe even that churned, and say, what can we do to be of support to you? How can I help you connect you with somebody, in your market or a new rep? It's an awesome time to invest in our relationships, to kind of people again, if you will, right? And build that for the long term.
Trust. It seems like there's a big element of that in building it with your people. So I guess this is always a big question for sales leaders, because when I first started in sales, I remember that classic, like, you don't want to get too close to your rep, maybe because you can't have the hard enough conversation with them. And I feel like for me that the opposite holds true. I feel like if I don't build that genuine conversation, like to Debra's point, I can't be authentic with them when we're having a hard conversation together. So how do you build trust with your employees, Debra?
Yeah, I can't help myself but jump in. I think when I entered the sales world, there was that feeling of you can't get too close to your rep, but there was one model for selling, and that was, let's go crush it, rah, 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 sports analogy. Then we're going to go to the bar and get drunk. And getting too close to your rep wasn't get to know them as a human, wasn't adjust your leadership style to what resonates with them. It wasn't understand their motives and drivers, and it wasn't establish a real human connection. What it meant was, don't touch your female employees. Don't touch your male employees. Don't become broy with your sales guys and start engaging in inappropriate behavior. Or maybe there was the one woman that did it with female leaders, but it was rooted in a lot of the stuff that it is my passion to root that stuff out in selling, because it limits who wants to enter sales. And sales is a really beautiful career if done correctly. So I fundamentally reject, don't get too close to your reps. What we meant by that 20 years ago is not what we mean by it today. And today, I think you have to get to know your people, and you have to be close to them, and you have to have a sense of empathy. And if you can't objectively look at performance and know someone as a human, you probably shouldn't be in leadership, is my bold statement on that topic.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, a lot of people get into sales leadership or people leadership for the wrong reasons. Maybe it's advancement in a career, and maybe they've done very well and on that end. But if you don't invest in the people first, I truly believe this job is just genuinely way too hard to continue to do it every single day. And so on that theme of building trust, I think let's shift tactically to, we hear that word all the time, build trust with your customers. Be empathetic with your customers. Well, it's not as easy as that, because we've been on the other end as sellers, maybe on like first calls. It's very, very difficult for a seller to trust you because, frankly, I don't think most people trust sales reps. And so let's actually shift this theme to how do we build trust with our customers? So some tactical advice for our sellers on the call here today. Anna, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think part of it is just being honest, right? And not trying to ram a contract down every prospect that you meet. Like there are, I think, I can't remember if it was Debra or Sam talked about, not every solution is right for every buyer. So I think that part of it is just being open and learning and seeing if it is a fit. I think one of the most disarming things I say, which my reps that I lead hate, but I do it because it's the right thing to say. If a buyer's saying, why should I buy you? I'm saying, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't. Like, we need to talk and learn about each other. And I need to understand what you need and what's important to you before I could ever, think that you might need what I'm selling. So I think part of it is just coming from, I'm here to help people and solve problems, and coming with that mindset. If a rep is scared that they're going to lose out on a deal, the advice I would give you as a rep is, over your career, you will win far more with the mindset of you want to help people and provide them with solutions that they can actually use that are going to be of value to them. And if you have to lose a few because you're, not going to try and sell something to somebody that they don't need, you will far more than make up for it over your career as a salesperson. So I think that, to me, is the biggest advice, is just being, real about what you sell and what needs you can solve, and not being misleading. And, I think that's the worst thing, is somebody buys and they're talking to their customer success rep saying, well, that's not what the sales rep told me. I mean, that happens all the time, unfortunately, because we're just, scared to not be transparent about our solution or what it does and doesn't do. So yeah, that's my big thing, is just, being real.
Yeah, walking away from a bad deal as a seller actually is good for your buyer, and being able to be transparent with that, and at least make recommendations. I think we use that word help all the time. If we genuinely want to help, we should understand if we can or cannot, and we should actually help prescribe them, because that in turn will eventually come back to us. And that's, I think, one element of building trust. Something people aren't very used to with sellers is, hey, I don't want to sell you, and this is the reason why. And so what about you, Sam? What's your advice for sellers who are trying to build trust in this environment? Because I will say, like, top of mind, I don't think there's maybe immediate need, or I would say maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze for a lot of buyers right now in terms of trying to procure new software. And so, as maybe they have their initial conversation, they may not get the initial deal. How do they build trust to ultimately maybe even land something later this year when, budgets start to open up, or when spending isn't as conservative?
I think there are big things and small things that we can do every day to build that trust. I think Anna's perspective, right, is spot on there. I think if you really look at every conversation you have as a way to solve a challenge for somebody, and you walk away from that and say, what success to me after a discovery call is, what was their challenge? And do we have an idea of whether or not we can solve it or somebody else? I talk about a mechanic that's local here in our area. I have an SUV that's 10 years old. I brought it in. They said, there's 6 things wrong with your car. Pour yourself a bourbon before we tell you how much money it's going to cost. I was like, okay, great. But the thing that they came back to us and said was, we can fix 3 of them. There's also class action lawsuits happening to the maker of your car for the other 3. Pretty sure that if you bring it to the dealer and mention that, they'll fix it to you for free. Sorry, what? Right? Just that trust, right? Giving an opportunity for them to be able to solve something and then say, here's another way that you can get it for free, will make me talk about them on a sales webinar for the rest of my life, right? And I think we can do that same thing. I think that also, when we have those conversations, again, not everybody is right for us right now. Not everybody is right for us in general, right, for our solutions. And if we think about how to help them, how to introduce them, how to think about something with whoever they hire, or end up engaging, will make such great strides in the long term. That is how we build kind of this flywheel of success, of trust, of relationships that end up coming back. And I think for us, even at Sam Sales, we've signed almost 170 clients in 3.5 years. And that doesn't happen by accident, right? It obviously happens by word of mouth, but it also happens because we've kissed a lot of frogs, to use Anna's example, but those frogs have grown up and then they've eventually come back to us, which has been great. And I think that that's because we really put the buyer first, right? We would love your revenue. We would love to work with you. We'd love to work with everybody, but our whole goal is just to help. And at some point, we will probably be a right solution for you. And we hope you will come back to us because we were trustworthy and we're honest and we're transparent to begin with.
It's funny. When I think early in your sales career, I think one of the biggest challenges for sellers is they just haven't had a chance to actually buy and see the other end of the spectrum. And so for me, when I first bought my home, one of the things or one of the professional services or tradesmen that I brought in was a plumber as well. And it just seems like, for you with the auto mechanic and me with the plumber, they genuinely want to try to help instead of maybe breaking your toilet and saying, I need to fix it now. They want to create a long-lasting relationship with you. And so building trust is, again, being transparent and trying to help you in areas where they don't monetize from it. And I still go to the same plumber to today.
I will say, it's interesting because I think for any sellers that are kind of listening to us say this, they're like, yeah, that's cute, but I have KPIs to hit and I have a quota to hit. So what am I going to do here? And what I would tell you is that if you just shift your mind for a second, right? Show up to that discovery call. You can steal our line that we coach on, which is, Debra, I could tell you a million things about Sam Sales, how we do 1, 2, 3, foothold, foothold, foothold. I'd love to hear about you first. I know your organization is going through this, this, and this because I did my homework. I'm showing you that I know you. I'd love to hear a little bit about you first, your team, your challenges, what your priorities are for the year, if that's okay. And what I'm basically doing is I'm cracking Debra's head open, metaphorically, and saying, what's in there? Why'd you show up today, right? And I'm going to get a lot of the answers that I would have gotten if I had just painfully gone through 19 questions, that somebody told me I have to ask on the call to get to banter to whatever. And I'm going to get so much information, but I'm also going to get business challenges, not product challenges out of her. And you're showing up to help, but really it's helping both of you because you're qualifying the deal really quickly. You're starting the call in a different way than 99% of our calls go. And we can genuinely help. So we're really opening up that conversation, right? To figure out what those business challenges are and to either speed up qualification or disqualification and moving on. So I'm telling you, just shifting that perspective and starting those conversations in a different way will make you infinitely more successful, not less. So
I will say I love how you framed show me that you know me right behind you. But Debra.
Yeah, got it trademarked. Go ahead, Debra.
I love that. And what you didn't explicitly say, but that is critical for what you're describing to work is to master the art of listening. What I find with a lot of SaaS companies is we spend a lot of time training our sellers how to talk. And Lord help you if you come from a SaaS company that has a list of questions that you have to get through in discovery. Because what that feels like as a buyer is like, Debra, tell me about your pain points. And I'll talk and I'll say something about, I don't know, how happy I am when it's sunny out. And then they'll say, thank you. How do you feel when it's sunny out? And you're like, I literally just told you that. So doing an open-ended question and cracking into your buyer's head, I think is an amazing first step. And then you actually have to listen and actively listen and be actively curious about the person that you're talking to. And if you don't know how to do that, there's a really good TED Talk on how to have a conversation. It's Celeste Headley. I think it's like 10 minutes long. And if you Google TED Talk, how to have a good conversation, I'm sure it's the first one that comes up, but it talks a lot about not how you show up and speak in a conversation, but how you engage the other person, which is the most important thing. So I love that.
Engaging the other person. I think that's a underutilized skill, especially in this new Zoom environment. I think Zoom and telecalls were always reserved for inside sales, but as it forced every seller to go in with COVID, and now for a lot of sellers, hybrid or maybe not even in person anymore, to be able to do that. What's your advice for reps or even leaders out there in doing that?
Having a conversation over Zoom?
Yes, with the shift to Zoom and trying to now have a good, quote unquote, good conversation?
First and foremost, do not multitask. And I mean the obvious and inobvious, the obvious stuff and the not so obvious stuff. The obvious stuff is don't respond to Slack. Don't be text messaging your friends. Don't be reading a document. Don't have another window open. If you're she says this in her TED Talk, if you're in a conversation, be in it. If you don't want to be in it, get out of it. It's rude. It is so rude. And you can tell when the person on the other side is doing something else. And I don't want to talk to that person again. Internal, external, my team, show up. If you're going to be there, be there. And that's the obvious. The inobvious is, a mentor of mine once said, you can do one of three things at a time. You can listen, you can respond, or you can be thinking. And if somebody is talking and you are planning what you're going to say next, the second you start, you're not paying attention anymore. And so stop. And what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to finish their sentence and you will have been actively listening and you will need a beat to process what they just said. And you won't instantly have a response. And it's going to sound like this. Huh. Wow. Okay. That's the worst. That is the worst thing that's going to happen, is there's going to be that beat while you're processing. And guess what? You're a human and they're a human, and that happens. And that's okay. I would much rather have somebody say, I'm processing what you just said, and take a minute, then jump in and ask me a question that's completely unrelated to what we've been talking about, but they thought of it 35 seconds ago and they're a genius and they have to get their question out. Like, I don't want that. I want to talk to a human. And that's true of our buyers. It's true of our people, true of my mother. It's true of everybody.
Oh man, I was going to jump in. Anna, I would love your opinion on this. I was going to just say one thing too. It's amazing to think about too with our sellers, the generational changes in how we communicate and how important it is that we teach these practices. So I think for us, we expect our sellers to be good listeners, to ask questions, to be active listeners, to ask open-ended questions, to think about the question behind the question, on and on. When, if we really think about it, there's so much research on this, but if you think about mid-millennial back to Gen Z, a lot of the way they communicate is not by asking questions, it's by talking at each other. So this is what I had for lunch, you tell me, I'll tell you what I did this weekend, so on and so forth, instead of being like, Devin, how was your weekend? What did you do? And then asking active listening questions on top of that. So while I'm 41, so my generation is like very simple for us to ask questions, right? It's also the culture that I was raised in, to ask a lot of questions. But for others, it's a completely new thing. It's just not how they communicate. So if we're expecting this as a basic part of their job, but they don't even know how to do it in their personal life, right? This is something that we have to teach them how to have a conversation. Okay, and I'm going to stop talking. You go.
No, and it actually gets back to what Devin was saying, right, too, about these, just like I'm going through, I think it was Devin was talking about, like, just like the qualification questions that we put people through. And that it goes back to like these processes of factories that were, don't really work. This is why we have a list of qualification questions, because we're trying to make a factory. And so I think that, when I'm recruiting for sales, my number one sort of red line thing is that they have to have innate curiosity. And that might be different for different generations, to your point, Sam, but they have to, I believe that to be a really effective salesperson as a professional through a career, you have to have innate curiosity. It's like what Debra said, you've got to show up and want to hear and receive and process, and then, ask the next question that's continuation of what you've just learned, or a clarification about something they just said. And like, you've got to kind of have innate curiosity. So even if the way curiosity shows up for this generation versus that 40-year-old generation, it might show up differently, you still have to find it. And so I like to design like hiring processes that get to that curiosity. And if they're not displaying it pretty early on, they're not going to continue on in the hiring process. So that's just one thing. I think that's just part of being somebody who's going to be really effective at sales. Just like there's different characteristics for different roles, I think curiosity is like a core, characteristic for a sales professional.
Core characteristic, sales professional, sales leader, I think just good person in general. So as we wrap up here, we have 1 minute left. And so in the spirit of, trying to keep everyone on time here, what is one key tip that you have for any sales leader listening out there for this year, if you just had to give one thing for them to focus on. And so maybe we start with Debra here, then we'll go Sam, and then we'll wrap up by Anna.
I don't know if this is a tip or a lecture, but I'm going to say it either way, which is your job is to create an environment where success is possible. And just say that to yourself every day. Are your targets possible in the environment that you've created? If no, what do you need to change? Be a detective, practice what you preach, be curious about your own org, and own that environment. Because if you don't, you're hurting the people that work for you, and you're probably not reaching the outcomes that you need as a business.
I think we spend, again, kind of the business results piece. We spend too much time really focused on the business results and not remembering about investing in our people. So one thing I would tell you, right, like you've been bestowed with the greatest honor. You have individuals who report to you whose livelihoods and success and growth depend on you being able to do your job successfully. So figure out what it is that you need to coach them on, whether you're a frontline manager or a sixth line manager, and be honest with yourself. Do you know how to do the things that they need from you? And if you don't, get that professional development or hire an outside counsel that can do that. But they depend on you for coaching, for investment in them, for giving a shoot about them. They depend on you for these things. So make sure you take the time to do it.
So it's hard to say just one, so I'm going to sneak in two. I mean, I think one is that even in environments like this, we can lead with both creating a culture of accountability as well as empathy. So what can we control? Can we make sure that we're accountable to a clean pipeline, right? If we can't be accountable to a quota that a board hit, you created 6 months ago, like what can we make sure that we're showing up as sales professionals and doing the things that we need to do? What can we control, whether it's activity, whether it's, clean pipelines again, but doing that all through empathy and not, to Deborah's point, I think earlier, of like, just you got to make the number, which leads to my second thing, which is I think these are times that results and attainment are relative, right? So this is not about, I have a whole team not making quota, like what's wrong with them? It's like, let me look at the benchmarks of what everybody is hitting and then manage from that, right? So if everybody's at, between 40 and 60% of attainment, like let's really focus on how do I get my 40% up to 60%, because 60% is the new normal right now, or whatever it might be. So I think it's like coming into what is the current state, the actual reality, and moving and going from there versus like something that you might not be hitting.
Man, where did time go? I would love to continue this conversation because personally, I'm learning a lot as a leader. And I think to Sam's point, there is not enough leadership and enablement out there. But for everybody who joined us today, thank you so much for joining us and learning from this amazing panelist. This webinar, again, was successfully managing your sales teams through troubling times. I hope you learned a thing or two because I definitely did myself. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, Devin. Thanks for having us.